Welcome to the Trusted Podcast with your host, Blake Johnson. In each episode, Blake interviews professionals in different areas of life that you need a trusted source of information, including trust and estate planning. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, trustedepa.com. Now, here's the host of Trusted Podcast, Blake Johnson. John Nebeker is a financial advisor with Eagle Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor. John's comments today are for informational purposes only. He and Eagle Strategies, LLC and its affiliates do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Listeners to this podcast should consult their own professional advisors before making any planning-related decisions.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Trusted Podcast. Excited to be with you today. We have got great guests lined up. We have John Nebeker, and John is a financial advisor with Eagle Strategies. He has worked in the financial services industry for 20 years, specializing in the estate and business planning. And the reason we're having him on here is he is also the author of the award-winning book, The Family Bank, The Key to Generational Wealth. And then just a side note, he and his wife, Whitney, are the parents of 8 kids, 2 sets of twins. So 8 kids, all 9 and under, is that right?
Yeah, 10 and under.
Oh, 10 and under, okay. It was 8 and under at one point.
It was.
Yeah, so that right there qualifies him to speak on a lot of different subjects, but we'll stick with the family bank today. So, John, thanks for being on. Appreciate you being on the show. What I want to start with first is give us kind of the story. How did we get here? How did, professionally, your background, what makes you qualified, but also, how did we get to talking about the family bank?
Yeah, so I joined my dad's financial planning firm out of college, had a wonderful experience under his tutelage, and I focused mostly on investments and then some insurance and a few other different financial products we've done. And I was privileged to work with him on some pretty big cases. He was always a very successful advisor, and he specialized in estate planning and also business planning. And so I got a pretty good understanding of how everything works in those areas. And, back in 2015, my wife and I were headed out to Europe for a 3-week trip without our children. And we thought, it'd be really smart to contact an attorney and make sure that we've got everything set up just in case the 2 of us passed away or died in a plane crash. So we checked with family, and we got some people lined up, some guardians lined up for our kids if we were not around, and also talked to this attorney about titling our stuff and creating a will and a trust. So a few weeks later, I was in his office, this attorney's office, signing my name to the trust, and all of a sudden a really strange feeling came over me. And in my mind, I felt the idea that I was creating a problem for my kids. And it was kind of a surprising experience. So I dropped the pen and I started thinking about it for a minute. I thought, well, why is that the case? This is what I tell all my clients to do. It's just prudent planning to go to an attorney like yourself and make sure everything's set up just in case the worst happens. But I couldn't shake it. So I turned to the attorney and I said, hey, am I doing anything wrong here? Tell me about what happens if my kids grow up and there's a bunch of money left over in the trust after they've been raised. And because I remember that at age 25, they just get everything. And he says, yeah, that's what everybody does. And so I started thinking that was not the best thing. And so I said, are there any alternatives? Is there any way to make sure that my kids have the training that they need in order to be smart financial people and that this money won't ruin them? And he said, well, you can get very detailed and do a bunch of rules and, maybe get creative, like match their W-2 each year or something like that. But that felt like a lot of work and it didn't feel right. So I ended up signing the document as it was, and never really thought anything of it after that. But I always remembered that. I was like, I don't want to create a problem for my kids. I need to revisit this sometime. So a few years later, there was an attorney in another city that reached out to my office and said, hey, I'm creating a family bank and I need your help. So my first question was, well, what's a family bank? And so he explained to me, it's this brilliant way that I can, speaking as him, that I can put money away for my needs, for emergency fund, my retirement, investment, funding for things that I want to buy down the road. And hopefully there's enough in my lifetime that I can share that with my children in the form of low interest loans so they can get started in their lives, getting through education, buying a home, starting a business, whatever it may be. And then, and when I'm gone, the best part of this is this system will be in place long after I'm gone and my children and their children are gone. This could continue out, depending on the state, 1,000 years, and maybe even longer. So that got my interest, and I could not find enough information about the family bank. I went to Amazon, I bought every book I could, I went to the library, I checked out every book, I went to YouTube for hours and hours, and I talked to everybody I knew, including my dad, very successful advisor, every attorney I knew. A few people had heard of the idea, but they didn't know much else after that. And so I began kind of a self-created research project where I talked to as many people as I could. I discovered that some of my clients had actually been following a pattern that fit this family bank model for decades, and I didn't know it. So I got to talk to them. And then I researched some of the wealthiest families in history and figured out that the ones that still had money had actually been practicing this same system. So it was really exciting for me personally to discover that this is a tried and true system that works, and it's just not very common. So that's been my mission, to try to broadcast that as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's kind of what led us to get to know each other. John reached out to me saying, hey, have you heard of this family bank concept? And vaguely knew of it. And then, I went through my own deep dive, and we've been working on stuff together ever since. So let's start with, you kind of touched on it with your personal experience. What are the pitfalls in the traditional estate plan of just age-based distributions?
Yeah, good question. So for hundreds of years, Americans have had this tradition of when you die, the people who get your leftover stuff are your next of kin. And unfortunately, that doesn't work very well today. It worked 200 years ago when the main asset you were distributing was property, in this case, farmland. 80% of Americans lived and worked on farms. Well, you switch that to today, where there's less than 1% of Americans working and living on farms, where 80% of us are in the services industry. And you also see how the estates of people are much larger, and they're also much more liquid, meaning that you can turn stuff into cash really quickly. We're in the age of eBay. So what most people do is they follow that same model. Let's just give everything to our kids equally. But that ignores the fact that not everybody in every family is financially competent. And sometimes you have major relationship issues between siblings and children and parents. And money can exacerbate those issues. I think of money as kind of like an accelerant. It's not necessarily good or bad, but it accelerates you down the path you're already on. I've seen people who have good character get money, and then it made them even better people doing greater work. And then the opposite is true. It hurt people worse than the situation they were in. And so with that in mind, it occurred to me that there's got to be a better way than just dumping your stuff on your kids. And so one of the families I talk about in the book is the Rockefeller family. And I did a deep dive into all the industrial age billionaire families, and I discovered that the Rockefellers were the only ones who, in their direct line, were still multimillionaires and had billions of dollars to their name. Everybody else that I studied, in particular the Vanderbilt family that I also contrast in the book, they had quite a bit more money than the Rockefellers, but in the space of just a few generations, that money was dissipated If you're familiar with The Great Gatsby, that book was essentially modeled after the Vanderbilt family. They lived very opulent lifestyles. They had 10 residences on the island of Manhattan alone, and they lived a crazy lifestyle. Well, several decades later, all of the descendants of the Vanderbilt family were at Vanderbilt University, which bears the name of the old Commodore, and there wasn't a single millionaire among all of them. And so I thought, what a tragedy. We know who these people are because of the philanthropy and different things they've done, but they didn't pass on those values of hard work and thrift that Cornelius Vanderbilt lived. And so to contrast them, the Rockefellers, they saw what was going on with the other families, and they said, not in our family. We're going to put a system of trust together where we shepherd these assets, and we're going to treat them as a stewardship rather than an entitlement. And what they did was they gave everybody opportunities to access the wealth, but they weren't going to receive money for nothing. The idea of inheritances was sort of anathema to them, as it is for most people. It's ironic, you asked earlier, like traditional planning, even though most people do that, they just give their stuff to their next of kin, almost everybody says, yeah, that's a bad idea. So it's really strange that we keep doing the same thing that most people think is a bad idea. Anyway, I think it's because they were in my situation where they just didn't know any better. And so here's a wonderful example looking at these families and learning about this system. It presents a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting when I have clients that say that, they're just like, oh, I don't want to burden them after I'm gone. I don't want to restrict them. I don't want to govern them. I don't want to tell them what to do. And it's like, that's not what you're doing. It's, are you doing what's in their best interest? Now, for some of them, absolutely, they don't need any guidance. They're going to be good either way. But yeah, it is interesting to see that because there hasn't been a whole lot out there about other options. So, we've already talked about, kind of what the wealthiest families do. So, let's get into what is a family bank, specifically, and what can that do? How can this solve that problem of just distributing wealth?
Yeah. So a family bank is kind of a grand term. It doesn't necessarily relate to a specific product or legal entity or something, even though there are those involved. And I'll explain that in a minute. But it's basically a principle. And again, I use the word stewardship. It's the principle of giving people opportunities linked with accountability. That's the start of a family bank. Now, a family bank, you got to have two things. You got to have love. You got to love somebody and want to help them out. And number two, you got to have a little bit of money. Now, that money doesn't have to be billions of dollars. It can be just a little bit of money. And it's scalable to whatever people have. But you got to have those two things. So you could run a family bank out of a shoebox. You could say, I have some money set aside, and I have these family members who are trying to get ahead financially. They want to get an education. They want to buy a home. They want to start a business. They want to invest in something. I'm going to give them an opportunity, and I'm calling it an opportunity, not a gift, because I'm going to give them access to this money, but I want them to pay me back. And I want them to pay me back with interest, not because I'm looking to make a bunch of money off of them, but because I want to instill in them the importance of being accountable and productive with this opportunity. So if they earn enough money, and it depends on the family. Sometimes there's a rule where if they just double the amount that they were lent, then they repay the original amount, and then that's the end of that. Or it's a time frame, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. And so that's kind of the beginning of it. To get more complex, when there's more assets involved, more cash accounts, more property, different things like that, that's when it's really smart to have somebody like you involved, where you are not only in your lifetime standardizing this system and avoiding those relationship pitfalls that you have of directly loaning money to people in your family, which we've all seen, most of us, can be a real problem. But you create this third party of a family bank, a bank board that's in charge of lending money to people and tracking the payments and then, whatever, all that involved. So then it pays to put it inside of a trust. Now, we use trusts rather than corporate entities because the beauty of a trust is nobody owns it. It's really just an extension of who you are. It's a shadow that's undying of your lifetime. And trust can outlive people. In fact, depending on the kind of trust and the state that you're in, they can last a very long time, multiple generations. And so what I recommend people do is not only think about how the family bank can help you specifically in your retirement, your emergencies and all that, but how it can help your children and others, but then how it can help generations unborn of your descendants. Now, how exciting is that? I ask people all the time, I say, is there anything you can do in your lifetime that will last beyond your lifetime? Is there anything you can build or create that will stand the test of time? And with very few exceptions, it's impossible to build something that's going to last 1,000 years. I mean, pyramids have been around a long time. That's about it. There's not a lot of buildings that have been around for thousands of years. The family bank is something that every family can create, whether they be wealthy or just barely getting started. Everybody can create one, and everybody has the capacity to pass this system on nearly indefinitely, again, depending on where you structure this, through the use of trust. All right, so I've talked about the legal structure, and the final thing I'll just mention is that in the products, you've got to have the right kind of financial products that are there, or accounts that are feeding your family bank, because you got to put your money someplace. And what I've found is that cash equivalent accounts work really well. And the problem with cash, though, is that you've got it locked up in a bank, and sometimes the bank's not paying you very good interest, and sometimes the bank's not very strong. One of the things I observed from the Rockefeller family in particular, and other of these families, is they incorporate the use of life insurance inside of these trusts as a means of protecting the family, first of all, in case that somebody dies early or gets disabled or has a problem. And then secondarily, there are these cash accounts that essentially grow inside of these policies as an alternative to a savings account that have some really nice tax advantages. They grow without any tax. You can pull out money anytime for any reason. And then even the growth on these policies can be accessible tax-free in the form of loans. I get a little bit in the weeds there, but that's basically how some of these family banks work.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not exclusive to one type of thing. We've seen businesses, family businesses working there. Most of the time it doesn't, but it can. Real estate, rental income, that stuff. But yeah, the nice thing about an insurance policy is that if one of the people dies, when there's a loan outstanding, you have an influx of cash to offset that, so that family's not trying to come up with a way to pay off that loan. So it just makes sense. Just from a personal note, I experienced the family bank before I met John, just with my own dad. So I was partners with him in the law firm, and we were ready to part ways because he was scaling down, and so he basically owner financed me buying out the firm. And it was the same thing as the family bank. He was basically the one lending it. I had to pay him back with interest. It was an actual contract and all that stuff. But it allowed me to purchase it, whereas I probably wouldn't have qualified for the loan I needed for that outside of that. And I think that's the main thing of this is access to capital is far more important or is what restricts people from stuff. It's not ideas. It's not that they can't go and do stuff. They just don't have the capital to go do these things. The family bank provides a way for them to do it without getting the ownership outright. Is that right? What you would say?
That's a terrific point, Blake. Yeah. My biggest clients that I've worked with over the years, they all got their starts similar to you, where they had a family member that lent them some money to get started in this business enterprise. And, they probably could have waited for the bank to do it. And I'm thinking of one client in particular. He had a real estate purchase that he was making, and the bank was dragging their feet. They had to do all kinds of extra forms and research on him to see if he was a good credit risk. And he was about to lose the deal. And so he approached his father and said, "Hey, I'm really frustrated because I can't get the bank to lend me the money to buy this property." And his dad said, "Well, what if I lend you the money?" And he said, "Well, it's not why I came here to talk to you about it. I was just complaining about the deal." And he said, "No, I can get you the amount you need in cash tomorrow. Just let me know if you want me to do that." And he says, "But I'm going to make you pay me back, and I want you to pay me with interest," which he did. And so it all worked out really well. So he was able to make the purchase. And then a few months later, he refinanced because things had gone up in value. He paid off his dad, paid off the loan, including the interest that he owed him. And then he held that property for a number of years. It continued to appreciate. And then he was able to roll it into another property that he purchased. And it's just like a leapfrog after leapfrog of opportunities that kept him growing. And he's worth a lot of money today. And so it's a story that I've heard over and over and over. So this family bank concept is not really foreign. It's just standardizing it and making it available to everybody can be foreign. And I think one of the reasons that it's not as common as it should be is because people who have tried lending money to family members, inevitably there are problems. I mean, I know people, lots of people that have lent money to family members and not gotten it back, and that's ruined their relationship. Some people just say, let's just not do it at all. Well, it's interesting because your family has the most vested interest in your success. So it makes sense for a family member to try to do everything they could to help you become successful. The family bank has that in mind. It says, well, we're going to lend these funds to you, and we're this third party. We're going to help you. We're going to have somebody assigned to you as a mentor. We're going to have you sign a contract that makes sure that you owe this money back to the family bank. We're going to charge you a low interest rate, whatever it is, depending on the family and the contract. And, in some cases, these are religious people. We're going to pray for you. We're going to make sure we do everything we can to see that you can make this work. So it's really a beautiful thing. And I've seen it change families' lives. Like I've seen family members who have been estranged from the family for whatever reason. And the dad or mom reached out to that child and said, hey, I've got a financial opportunity for you. I've got $10,000 with your name on it, but I want you to bring me a proposal for what you'd use this money for. And it has to be something that will improve your financial situation. But write me a proposal. Let's write a contract, whatever. And in the case of even a family member of mine, he did that with his dad, and he thought better on it. He's like, why don't I come help my dad with his businesses? And so it can work wonders. If money has a capacity to wreck relationships, I believe it also has a capacity to help fix relationships if you use it wisely.
Yeah, and I like that point of it being $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever. It doesn't have to be for a full building or for the purchase of a business or whatever. It can be a car. It can be credit card debt. It can be your student loans. It can be any of those things. And so it's really just, you can start now. But let's say someone is ready to move forward to do something bigger. What is the steps or the conversation that they should have before they come to see someone like you?
Yeah. So I felt really remiss because when I wrote the book, I honestly believed, Blake, that I could put everything in there that people would need as a guide to just start a family bank on their own, reach out to their legal and tax people, and create a family bank. Well, what I found was it was enough to get people really interested in it, but it lacked a lot of the logistical information that most people need in order to get it done. There's a lot of information there, but I don't have names of attorneys to reach out to, and I don't have specific kinds of trusts and all the language of the trusts that I recommend they have in there for different reasons. But anyway, so the first thing is to learn about the idea and then to talk to family about it. And the second thing, again, is to reach out to an advisor like myself or somebody else who's familiar with this system, or an attorney that does this, or a CPA, and see if they can kind of guide you through the process. It is a process. There are multiple steps, and we go into that, and we have, it depends on how big the case is and what the family dynamics are, but we have a process that can usually take between 1 and 2 months. And we go through the family's finances. We do a financial review. We make recommendations, and then we pair them with the attorney. We pair them with the tax professionals, and we actually have some members of our team that specialize in education. So they'll actually train the family about how to hold family bank board meetings every quarter, and what are the steps to getting a loan from the family bank. What are the contingencies if somebody, like you said earlier, misses a payment or dies or defaults on a loan, what happens then? And what happens long term, after this generation is gone? Who's going to take the reins of being in the family bank board to keep this system going? So you do need the help of professionals to do that. But yeah, I just say start with the idea, talk to many people you can. And if you ever want to have an insight from our team, happy to oblige.
Okay, awesome. What is the best advice you've ever been given? This doesn't have to be family bank related. We just want to get good advice you've ever been given in your lifetime.
Oh, I thought about this when you asked me this question a while ago. I think the best thing is to not try to become an expert in everything. Find out what you do really well and do that. Don't try to become a jack of all trades. But I really believe that each of us was given specific talents or gifts, and I believe from a higher power, and that we're supposed to figure out what those gifts are, what those talents are, and then magnify those gifts and use them to benefit ourselves and benefit others. And so if there's something you can't do very well, and going back to our discussion about creating a family bank or doing your taxes or creating a trust, don't go to the internet and create a trust. Just don't do that. Try to find somebody that you trust and then delegate that responsibility to them. And when you find a trustworthy expert, it will free you up to do what you do really well. And then you can operate and magnify the situation you're in. But I don't know, that's just something that came to mind when you asked me that question.
Okay, so this is the fun one. Outside of work, what's something people wouldn't expect to know about you? We want to get the people to really understand who John is, that maybe no one else really knows.
Oh, well, before I got married, I liked to do triathlons, and I regularly trained and competed. I got first place in one. I was really happy about that. And then I got married, and that kind of went out the window because we had all these children coming very quickly, and no, it's nobody's fault but my own, but I didn't make the time to continue to do that. But here's the only reason I bring this up, because it's not a sad story. My children are starting to get old enough to compete now. And we actually have a coach that we go to several times a week, and he drills us on the transitions, in between the different events. We do the swim, we do the bike, we do the run, and that's been really fun for me. And so it's one thing to compete in that way. I know you're a runner, and so you know what it feels like to be in those competitions and to feel how good it is on your body to do those things. Add that to doing it with the people you love the most, and it's even better. So I'm just in the very beginning stages of it. Like I said, my oldest is 10 and my second oldest is 9, and my daughter, who's 7, she's starting to do it with us too. But that's what's really fun. So yeah, you could say that John is an inspiring triathlete, or a recovering dad bod dad who's coming back into his triathlon days.
Nice. Yep, I've done triathlons too. I'm probably gonna do another one here to get back on that. But it's transitions, man. They kill you. You don't realize how hard it is to get out of a wetsuit and then get on a bike until you have to try and do it fast.
That's why I always laughed, because some of us have natural buoyancy, and so it doesn't matter how cold the water is. I never worried about it that much. Didn't have to worry about a wetsuit, so just right through the transition station.
There you go. That helps. Awesome. Well, thanks, John. We're out of time today, but appreciate you being on the show, telling us about the family bank. If you guys have any interest in that, please go find his book on Amazon. I've read it. Super, super helpful in understanding that. Once again, that's the family bank, the key to generational wealth, and it's John Nebeker. So with that, we'll sign off. Until next time.
You've been listening in to the Trusted Podcast with your host, Blake Johnson. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, trustedepa.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others. Please subscribe to make sure you are notified each time a new episode is released each week.